So in other words, if I'm going to, when I come back to you, because one of the things that I want you to actually, expatiate is to tell us if we haven't actually had a democratic selection process, because for the minutes you've been speaking, you've been talking about individuals who handpick people to run the affairs of state.
Yes.
Let me come back to Dr. Ekechi, who is also a politician. Tell us how it's been like when we talk about democracy. I know we'll come back to the issue of internal democracy within political parties, but looking at it on a national scale, from what Professor Ndibe has pointed out, it would seem as if we haven't actually had a true democracy from the onset.
Well, I think given the sequence of your questioning, I can't help but take my cue from what Prof have said in continuing the discussion. And I would like to say that, given the example he just talked about Obasanjo, I think he is right. But the only thing I seem to disagree most of the time is that we shouldn't have expected more than what we got. We were coming from a military dictatorship. The military dictatorship were very reluctant to give up power.
I just hold the thought there.
Right.
I just wanted to find out if it's all sorted with Dr. Sabi Abdullahi, who's the Senate spokesperson for the Assembly. Quickly, Dr. Sabi Abdullahi, I hope you can hear me now. We're trying to look at the journey so far and see how we can...
hear you now.
Absolutely, that's great, awesome. So we're trying to see, because your arm, the arm of government which you are a member of, that's the legislature, is the oldest in our democracy. So we would want to ask if there were any kind of teething problems from the onset in 1999.
Yes, thank you, Sulema, for having me. Surely, you've hit the nail on the head. At the beginning of this dispensation in 1999, it was very obvious that given those number of years from 1983 to 99, the corporate memory of the legislative institution was lost, to the extent that even the bureaucracy was actually disillusioned at that time. And so it was more or less like starting from scratch, because the few staff who were, legislative staff of the National Assembly were just struggling to survive since the, legislature was not in place. And so obviously in 1999, both the bureaucracy that is supposed to serve as the institutional memory and the politicians that were newly elected to serve as senators and members of the House of Representatives are coming to something you can say new. And so expectedly, there has been a lot of teething problems at the beginning. But let me say that given what is happening today, if you look at the trajectory, I think it's been a trajectory that signifies incremental growth, incremental development in the legislature. And culminating to the 8th Senate today, I think we have learned a lot from the past assemblies, and that has gone a long way in helping us to shape the way we work in the 8th Senate today.
I don't know. Let me take you to what Professor Ndibe did say. It would seem as if from 1999 till almost this moment, we've always seen a process where people, individuals, sometimes we use the word godfathers, they handpick people, all in the guise that's democratic. So how has the National Assembly helped to see that we have a better, statute that can actually help stem such kind of system whereby an individual can dictate who becomes, someone somewhere in a democracy like ours?
Well, in the first instance, we have to be very honest and sincere. The choice of who becomes is actually, subject to that individual's, decision. In the first instance, when you have 3 candidates, presidential candidates, for example, people go out to go and vote. The choice is theirs. And you cannot question why they choose whoever they choose. And if you look at that, then you should expect that we are a product of our own society. those who come to the National Assembly are members of the community and society they belong to, and through the process of electioneering, they get there, whether by selection or by election. The point is that somebody somewhere is involved in making a decision. Now, because our democracy is still nascent, what I'm expecting is that as we move forward, you begin to get to that stage in which Nigerians are now getting wiser and they begin to take their destiny in their own hands by ensuring that their vote counts. And I think, given what has happened in 2015, it is very obvious that we have moved some steps away from what happened in 2011. And I think that is the point I was talking about earlier, that we've had some incremental growth. But you see, the practice of democracy itself requires a lot of patience. It requires a lot of understanding. It requires a lot of dialogue. It requires a lot of collaboration. It requires a lot of cooperation. In all of this, if you don't have patience, you cannot get anything out of it. So I think my submission is that we are making progress, but the truth also is that Nigerians want to see things happening fast. And you don't blame them for that. Okay. Because year in, year out, if there has been some incremental growth, I think we will have been able to see that, yes, this democracy is truly providing some dividends to us.
Dr. Sabiabla, we'll come back to you. Allow me to come back to the studios here, to the gentleman here. I had to stop Dr. Kechi there for a while so I can establish contact with you. Quickly now, you've heard him, and one wonders, 19 years down the line, we're still describing our democracy as nascent. Tell us, you are on a course before I stopped you for a while. Is this what it is like as a politician, someone who is a card-carrying member of a political party?
Well, let me talk firstly like as a statesman. I talk more importantly as a statesman. Let me talk more importantly as a Nigerian, as a citizen who believe in the sanctity of Nigeria.
Is it really better to talk as a statesman? Because, you know, sometimes when you have the toga of a politician, does it negate
because as far as I'm concerned, being on this stage and speaking to Nigerians, those listening to me are not necessarily members of my own party, APC. I have people also who are from other parties who may be interested in what we're discussing. So I'm speaking to Nigerians. So I'm talking from the perspective of a citizen. And I just want to establish that. Beautiful. But if in the course of doing that, my political experience comes to bear, so be it. So I was saying before that if you are trying to conclude whether we've done well or not, you cannot do that outside the consideration of who we are. You can't do that outside the consideration of the circumstances that brought us together. You can't do that outside the consideration of our diversity. The marriage that brought about Nigeria as an entity in the first place, 1914. What brought us about? If you give consideration to these factors, I would say that almost like strange bedfellows, we decided to come together as a nation. If you give that, and the fact that military, what he called the military temperament, and I want to say the military culture, had become part and parcel of us. Remember, there were so many attempts to hand over to civilian government before finally it happened in 1999. So when it happened in 1999, what we inherited was majorly the military experience, the military culture. And that is why you said, like Prof. Reed did observe, Obasanjo was almost behaving like a military man. And it is not too far to see why he did so. Now we graduated from that to see a transition from Obasanjo to Yar'Adua, from Yar'Adua to Jonathan. But I am happy to say, now let me talk like a politician who is a member of APC. But I'm happy that by his own testimony, Obasanjo had not done well during his own regime, and even by his own recommendations of Yar'Adua, it will appear that it wasn't the best. Even by his own recommendation of support for Buhari, it will also mean that he hasn't done the best. So my final conclusion would be in that perspective is, therefore, now that Obasanjo is beginning to advise Nigerians on what path to follow, let us not forget in a hurry that his judgment had not been assessed to be very fine in the past. So if we are beginning to listen to Obasanjo now, we should also listen to him with a pinch of salt, because the advice are given to Nigerians in the past, according to you, and according to many other observers, have not been the best. So we should listen to other voices in deciding who makes it in 2019.
Isn't it amazing, Professor Ndibe, that we're still talking about individuals, 19 years down the line, talking about individuals who definitely will handpick people. But when we come back, that's what I want us to look at. We'll take a moment, we'll come back and look at this journey so far, 19 years down the line. How fair has it been for our democracy in Nigeria? Well, if you just joined us, you're welcome to Political Stew here on Television Continental, and we have three gentlemen looking at the journey so far, 19 years down the line, Nigeria's Democracy Day. And we have with me in the studios here in Lagos, Professor Ndibe, and of course, Dr. Theodore Ekechi. And of course, in our Abuja studios, we have Dr. Sabi Abdullahi, who is also the chairman for public affairs for the Nigerian Senate. And we're looking at the journey so far, asking questions as to where have we been and what have we been cooking, to the extent that we still haven't been able to put a name on the meal, not even finish the meal. We don't even have a name on it. So before we go back to Sabi Abdullahi, I was going to ask you, we've always been talking about an individual or individuals. There's hardly any state or geographical location you go to in Nigeria that you don't talk about an individual. Is either he's a puppet master, known or unknown, but there's some kind of hand somewhere. An Anambra case is something that, stood out in our political history. But are we likely to get past this moment?
I think we must. If our democracy is to succeed, is to survive, we must. What we need to do is to establish and nurture institutions. And that's why some of us are critical of Obasanjo, because Obasanjo became an imperial president and personalized political influence and used it when he had the opportunity, often for negative ends. But clearly, the answer is to begin to empower institutions. And that's why I was actually worried when Buhari was running, and people felt that once Buhari won the election, he was going to solve the problems of corruption in the country. And I said, no, Buhari, even if he meant to, did not have the resources to do it. We need institutions. We need institutions.
So you never thought he was going to be able to do that?
No, I never thought he would, because, and part of it is that I don't think that Buhari showed once he came to office, in fact, before he came to office, that he wasn't prepared. Buhari was, as a candidate, disastrous. It was all change. It was all the lifting of a broom. And as I said in those days, a broom does not translate to vision, does not translate to program. So the APC did not give us its program. The APC, as I said in another column, is simply, with the PDP, represents Siamese twins. So these are the same party, really, that had fractured into two factions, as it were. And so Buhari came to office on this credential that he fought corruption. What he'd done in the past as a military leader was simply to retire some people from positions, and some of them were the wrong people for him to have retired. But because he was a military president, military head of state, nobody could query him. So I proposed that Buhari should have an innovative approach to fighting corruption. We can't prosecute our way out of the crisis of corruption, right? There are too many Nigerians who have committed acts of corruption. They are not always governors or ex-presidents or ministers or commissioners. There are vice chancellors, there are lecturers, there are journalists, there are civil servants, okay? You don't have enough courts, you don't have enough lawyers to prosecute corruption in this country.
I think good thing here we have